Welcome friends to the beginning of a new bonus series for My Daughter's Keeper, where we take a deep dive into one of my favorite rabbit holes, the weird and fascinating mess that is Call of Cthulhu in video game form. Over the years, countless studios have taken a crack at adapting Chaosium's classic tabletop RPG into pixels and polygons, with results that range from inspired to baffling, and often both at once. We're kicking things off with a real relic of the genre, Infogrames Shadow of the Comet, released back in 1993. I first played this many years ago, back when video games were a regular part of my life rather than an occasional nostalgic detour. Revisiting it now feels like opening a time capsule, a window not only into early 90s adventure game design, but also into how Lovecraft's Mythos was being interpreted long before the current explosion in Cthulhu-inspired media. The story does lend heavily on two of Lovecraft's more famous tales, the Dunwich Horror and the Shadow of Innsmouth, and there's a strange charm in seeing how faithfully, or clumsily as it may be, those elements are stitched into a video game narrative. And with the stage set, let's light the lantern, steal our nerves, and descend into the gloom that is Call of Cthulhu, Shadow of the Comet. The Shadow of the Comet is set in 1910 and casts you as John Parker, a young British photographer and amateur astronomer. Parker has travelled to the isolated New England town of Illsmouth, a thinly veiled Innsmouth analogue, to photograph the passing of Halley's Comet. His scientific interest conceals a deeper and more personal obsession. He believes the comet is tied to strange cosmic events and occult happenings, and hopes to document them firsthand. Once Parker arrives in Illsmouth, things quickly spiral from quaint to sinister. The townsfolk are openly hostile, secretive, or just plain unnerving, much like that in Shadow over Innsmouth. It becomes clear that the entire community is enthralled to an ancient cult devoted to the Great Old Ones. Parker learns that 50 years earlier, during the comet's passing, a similar expedition ended in disaster. Its leader, Lord Bosine, went mad after stumbling upon the town's dark rituals. As Parker investigates, he discovers Illsmouth's terrible history. The cult has made pacts with otherworldly entities, calling upon them during the comet's return, and plans to do so again. The influence of the Dunwich Horror comes through here strongly. The game reveals the existence of hybrid offspring, strange rites in hidden caverns, and the presence of the terrifying Yog-Sothoth looming over the town's fate. The plot escalates as Parker is hunted through Illsmouth by cultists and slowly discovers that his comet-watching expedition has placed him squarely in the middle of a ritual that could open the way for the Old Ones. In true Lovecraftian fashion, he finds himself confronting inhuman creatures, reading blasphemous tomes, and piecing together a puzzle that promises only madness at the end. By the finale, Parker is forced underground into a vast network beneath Illsmouth. There, he witnesses the cult's attempt to summon Yog-Sothoth during the comet's passage. Depending on the player's choices, Parker can sabotage the ritual and escape, although not without the cost of his sanity, or perish as yet another victim swallowed up by Illsmouth's endless cycle of cosmic worship. One area where the Shadow of a Comet still holds up surprisingly well is in its presentation. The graphics, even today, have a charm that cannot be denied. The feeling that these are hand-painted backgrounds is wonderfully atmospheric, even rendered into the digital format that we see, rich with New England gloom, the duskiness, the weathered clapboard houses, and the kind of crookedness that feels like they've been lifted straight from a Lovecraft story. The character sprites may be a little stiff, but in a way that adds to the unease, making everyone you meet in Illsmouth feel just a little wrong. It's a window into a very specific moment in adventure game art design, and one that still carries a very nostalgic weight. On the audio side, the CD-ROM version does give the experience a welcome boost. Voice acting is somewhat limited, but it adds texture, and the ambient soundscape helps make Illsmouth feel lived in, if not exactly welcoming. Doors creak, footsteps echo, and you're left with a sense of being somewhere you probably shouldn't be. That said, I can't in all good conscience heap the same praise on the music. The score has its moments, but too often it slides into repetition or feels oddly out of step with the mood. Or worst, some of the looping tracks get downright grating if you're stuck in an area too long, and I'll be honest, I can rattle off half a dozen Amiga soundtracks from the same era that were far superior to this unfortunate effort. It's not enough to ruin the atmosphere, but it does stand out as one of the weaker elements of the package. Still, taken as a whole, the visual and audio design work together give Shadow of the Comet its enduring identity. For all its flaws, it looks and sounds like a Lovecraftian tale should. Brooding, strange, and a little unsettling. When it comes to gameplay, Shadow of the Comet is very much a product of its time. An early 90s point-and-click adventure with the quirks, frustrations and charms that implies. Though, to be precise, it isn't quite the point-and-click in the modern sense. Instead of the slick mouse-driven interface of LucasArts' Sierra, it uses a hybrid keyboard control system that feels a little stiff by today's standard. You guide Parker around the towns of Illsmouth one screen at a time, rummaging through drawers, poking through suspicious objects, and pestering the locals for information. The controls can be clunky. Sometimes Parker gets stuck on scenery or insists on walking at a snail's pace when you'd prefer to be on the run from cultists. But there's something oddly endearing about that clumsiness. Back then, we didn't think of it as archaic, but it was just how adventure games worked. Puzzle design is another hallmark of the era, and you'll be doing plenty of inventory juggling, combining odd little objects in strange ways, and scouring background items that are only a handful of pixels wide. It's easy to miss something vital and spend hours circling Innsmouth, convinced that you've overlooked a clue, which of course you almost certainly have. For all the frustration, there is a kind of satisfaction in finally spotting the scrap of paper or figuring out the right order of ritual symbols. And then there's the atmosphere. This is where Shadow of the Comet really shines, and where my nostalgia feels most justified. Despite its limitations, the game manages to sum up a sense of creeping dread. The backgrounds ooze with New England gloom, the characters' stiff animation somehow make them feel more unsettling, and the audio design, minimal as it is, does a remarkable job of making you feel watched and wanted and in real danger. It's easy with modern eyes to laugh at the awkward controls and the pixel hunting, but when I first played it, I didn't care. I was just thrilled to see Lovecraft's Mythos brought to life on my screen, however clunky the vehicle. Revisiting it now, I can't help but feel a certain fondness for those rough edges. They're part of the texture of the experience, part of why Shadow of the Comet still lingers in my memory after all these years. Which is why, looking back on it, it's hard for me not to smile. Yes, it's clunky. Yes, the controls are more awkward than they have any right to be. And yes, the puzzles sometimes veer into the who on earth would think of that thank you very much moon logic. But despite all that, or maybe because of it, it's a game that still occupies a very special place in my memory. There's a sincerity to it that's rare. The creator's love for Chaosium's Big One is clear in the way they try to capture not just these monsters, but the mood, the unease of walking through a hostile town, the dread of rituals carried out under the cold stars, and the creeping sense that you're meddling in something far bigger and older than yourself. For 1993, it was surprisingly ambitious, and in its best moments, it still manages to be genuinely atmospheric. Of course, I'm viewing it through the haze of nostalgia. I played it back when adventure games ruled my free time, and the mere act of seeing Cthulhu Mythos themes brought to life in pixels was thrilling. That glow definitely smooths over some of the rougher edges. A modern player coming to it fresh is less likely to be forgiving of its sluggish movement, its fiddly interface, and its unforgiving puzzle design. So where does that leave Shadow of Comet today? For me, it's a cult classic worth revisiting, a flawed gem that still shines with atmosphere and heart. But for the average modern gamer used to slick controls and streamlined design, it's probably more of a curiosity than a must-play. Ultimately, this one is for the diehards, the hardcore Lovecraft enthusiasts, the point-and-click adventurers who don't mind a little suffering for their reward, and anyone with a taste for the charmingly awkward experiments of the early 90s. For the rest of you, well, maybe watch from the sidelines as the comet comes passing by. And that'll be it for today's episode of My Daughter's Keeper. But if you like even more stories, mysteries, and misadventures, come join us over on Patreon. There you'll find exclusive actual plays like our recent Purgatory Chasm adventure, bonus audio and video content, and even special Patreon-only games where you can jump in as the players yourselves. So if you'd like to help support the show and be part of the fun at the same time, head on over to Patreon and look for My Daughter's Keeper. Links are in the show notes. We'd love to see you over there. And until next time, keep your dice lucky and your flashlight batteries fresh.